Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Carly Shortino Poulter, and I'm the director of the ARC Advocacy Network at the ARC of Indiana. And I want to welcome you to tonight's Ask the ARC. So, I don't know about you, but trying to keep up with all of the changes has been overwhelming. We have had a ton of changes that have happened in the last year, and trying to keep up with it all, trying to keep it all straight, trying to remember all of the different changes has been overwhelming. So if you have felt that way, you are not alone. And if you have had trouble trying to remember, wait, what are the rules now? Again, you're not alone. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight in our Ask the ARC. This is a year of change. And so we're going to talk about the changes that have gone into effect for Medicaid waivers, as well as for Medicaid health coverage. And because there have been so many changes, it's been hard for everybody to keep up. And there is a lot of confusion. There is a lot of misinformation. And it's more not that anybody's trying to spread misinformation, it's that people have interpreted things different ways, or they've heard different things, or they've merged things together. And so I want to make sure that tonight, especially, you are asking your questions. This is the opportunity to ask those questions. I will answer them to the best of my ability, while also recognizing that, quite frankly, there have been so many changes that even I have trouble remembering them all. But that's what we want to talk about tonight. So as you have questions, as we go along, put your questions in the Q&A. I will periodically stop and answer your questions as we go along. So if you ask a question and I'm not getting to it yet, wait a bit because it may be just later on in the presentation. And I know that this is scheduled to go for 1 hour, and I'm happy to do that. But more importantly, it's more important for me that we answer your questions. And so we will go as long as we need to go to make sure people have a really good understanding of where things stand right now when it comes to waivers and Medicaid health coverage. We're also going to talk just a little bit about the Indiana General Assembly because a new legislative session has begun. The reality is the filing deadline for bills was 2 o'clock yesterday, and so we still don't know what all has been filed yet. But I'll touch on that just a little bit, and also touch on ways that you can stay up to date to make sure that you're getting the most accurate information. Okay. So with that said, let me go ahead and get started. All right. So, like I said, there have been multiple changes throughout the last year. And I kid you not, we've had 4 sets of waiver changes in a year and a half. We had 3 sets go into effect just in 2025. I kid you not, we had new regulations go into effect last week. That's how much change we are going through. But not only have there been a lot of changes with waivers, there have also been changes with Medicaid health coverage. Now, some of those are actual changes, but some of those are also enforcing existing rules that they just previously weren't enforcing, and also some stricter interpretations of existing rules. So let's dig into this and let's start talking about the waivers, because like I said, new waivers went into effect last week. Literally December 31st of 2025, we had new waiver rules go into effect, and now we have some new services that are available. First of all, benefits counseling has been added to the family support waiver, the CIH waiver, the traumatic brain injury waiver, and the health and wellness waiver. And benefits counseling in this context is being able to talk to somebody to help figure out all the benefits that may be available to you, how those benefits work together, and especially how working can impact your benefits. So benefits counseling is often tied to Social Security, not always, but it often is. And they can actually go in and look into your specific situation to tailor that information to you so that it's not generic, it is tailored specifically to you. And this is the first time that benefits counseling has been available through the waiver. So that is a new waiver service. One of the other services that is brand new, and I've got to admit, this one I'm excited by, is extended services has been added to the health and wellness waiver. Okay, now I have to admit, not a fan of the name. But that's also the name of it on the family support waiver and the CIH waiver. But what I'm excited about is that this is the very first time that the health and wellness waiver will offer some employment supports. So extended services is actually an employment service. Typically, the way to think about it is, when you're working with vocational rehabilitation services to get or maintain a job, once things are stabilized and vocational rehabilitation moves to close your case, if you still need some additional help or support to maintain your job, you can now get that through your waiver on the health and wellness waiver for the very first time. Like I said, it's been available on the family support and the CIH waiver. I believe it's available on the TBI waiver. For the first time, it's available on health and wellness. And I know we've got a lot of people who are on the health and wellness waiver who want to be able to work, but they may need a little extra help to make that happen. That support is now going to be available. One of the other brand new services that has just gone into effect is something called self-directed care. Now, this has been available on the health and wellness, the pathways for aging, and the TBI waiver, but it is now finally available on the family support waiver and the CIH waiver. I'm going to talk about this just a little bit because in our February Ask the ARC, we are trying to arrange to have a guest speaker to talk specifically about self-directed care. I'm about 90% confirmed on that right now, but it is our goal to talk about this much more in depth in February. But with self-directed care, the individual on the waiver or their legal guardians, if they have one, are in charge of recruiting, hiring, training, and maintaining their own staff. Essentially, it kind of cuts the provider agency out of the equation. Now, the people you hire still have to fulfill all training and background check requirements. And you use a company called Palco for employment support. So like they're the ones who do payroll. They're the ones who make sure that all of the workman's comp forms are filed, all the tax forms are done. And so you'll use them as employment support for you to hire your own staff and you essentially become the employer. Now, with this service, legally responsible individuals and guardians cannot get paid as the paid caregiver, nor can active powers of attorney or healthcare representatives. And what I mean by that is if somebody is power of attorney and they are the ones who are making the decisions for somebody at this point, they cannot be the paid caregiver. And really that's more of a protection to make sure that that a person is making decisions based on the individual's needs and not based on their own financial gain, is essentially the idea behind that. For the TBI health and wellness and pathways waivers, the services that will allow you to use self-directed care are going to be attendant care, respite, and home and community assistance. For the family support and CIH waivers, you'll be able to use self-directed care for participant assistance and care or PAC services, residential habilitation, respite, or workplace assistance. This is an option that I think a lot of people are interested in. Their curiosity is piqued. And like I said, we're going to talk about that more in depth next month so that you can get a really good idea of what this is to see if it's an option for you and your loved one. There are also some services that are being adjusted. So first of all, there's now going to be one category for adult day services for the traumatic brain injury, health and wellness, and pathways for aging waivers. That's really something that affects providers more than the individuals. It's not something that individuals, I think, necessarily see, but that is one adjustment that's being made. Another is that the traumatic brain injury waiver will now allow shared staffing for residential habilitation. So that's going to be an option so that people can have roommates and share staff so that they can cut costs for themselves instead of having to pay that entire rent or that entire electric bill all on your own. They're also updating the definition for supported employment on the traumatic brain injury waiver to make it more useful and more beneficial for individuals. And they are combining home modifications and home modification assessment. When somebody needs to have a home modification done, maybe they need to install a stair lift, maybe they need a bathroom modification, whatever, maybe they need a ramp installed to their home. For a while now, you've had to do that in two different steps. You had to have home modification assessment and hire one company to do the assessment to basically, see if this is feasible and draw up the plans. And then you had a separate company that you hired to actually conduct the home modification. They've realized, you know what, it is much more efficient and it is much easier to combine those two services into one. We do have a couple of expiring services. So intensive behavioral intervention is no longer available through the waiver. This was a service that was on the family support waiver and the CIH waiver. It is no longer available. Now, this next expiring service is one that's going to be a little controversial, and that is the state will not allow any new enrollments in facility-based pre-vocational services. Now, I had to say it that way because, frankly, that is the official title of the service. Now, let me translate that into human. Okay. Facility-based pre-vocational services is the official title for a sheltered workshop. So no new people can enter a sheltered workshop. And I know that that's something that has been controversial. Um, and if you're not sure what a sheltered workshop is, because we have a lot of people who have never heard of a sheltered workshop or aren't really sure what that is. That is a facility, so a setting that typically was acting as a work center that would employ people with disabilities. But what made them different was that they were paying the people with disabilities sub-minimum wage, meaning less than minimum wage. No new people will be allowed to enter a sheltered workshop now. And that's got a lot of people nervous. But the reality is the state and the feds originally have actually been working toward ending sheltered workshop and more importantly, ending sub-minimum wage for about 15 years now. This is something that has been in the process for a very, very long time. Most of the sheltered workshops in Indiana have already closed, either because they just completely converted to a different service. So we have some that just decided to become day programs and just handled it that way. But we've also got a lot of workshops that actually transitioned their employment services. And part of that was that they were able to get grants from the state to modify their programs. And so we have workshops that have gone from manufacturing centers to things like running a cafe or a coffee shop, putting together gift baskets. I know of one where they recycle cardboard, and in fact, then bought a shredding truck so that they could go to businesses in their town and shred all of their sensitive documents. We've had a lot of really, really innovative ideas and a lot of workshops that have already converted over to different employment and different business ventures. And the biggest difference is they are also paying those employees at least minimum wage for their work. Speaking of controversy, this was also controversial. We now have certain service limits on the waivers. So music therapy is now limited to no more than 6 hours of music therapy per month. Recreation therapy is also limited to no more than 6 hours of recreation therapy per month. I know a lot of families and a lot of individuals are very upset by that. And one of the things I will say is, and I'm doing a little preview here, the state is planning on continuing to make more changes. Keep bringing this up in public comment if this is something that is really, really important to you. Behavior management is also going through some adjustments and some limits. So behavior management is being renamed behavior support services. And it's going to be broken down into 4 categories. And the first limit is that you can only have one category of behavior support services per month. The first category is consultation. So let's say, you just want someone, you don't need like somebody to work with every week. You just want somebody that you can call up to get advice, to get some ideas, and just talk something through with. That's consultation. And you can get up to 3 hours per month of consultation. You may also need a functional behavior assessment done. Well, you can do that through behavior support services, and they can bill up to 20 hours in a 60-day period to conduct that functional behavior analysis. What may be and so that's why functional behavior assessments are designed that way. Then we have comprehensive behavior supports, and that is the closest thing to what we may have thought of as behavior management. That's where you work with a behavior consultant in a direct manner. And now you can get up to 12 hours per month of comprehensive behavior supports. You can appeal for some temporary additional hours if needed. Their idea behind that is if somebody's already using, their 12 hours, and let's say they have a parent who passes away, or they need to move, or there's some big event that may require them to have some additional supports during that time. They can actually apply for a temporary increase in those hours, but the state's intent is that that increase would be temporary. And then we have clinical supervision. That's one that doesn't work directly with the individual, but is kind of more of an indirect oversight role. And you can bill the waiver for up to 1 hour of clinical supervision. One of the other big changes that has now gone into effect involves the level of care. So the level of care process changed for the health and wellness, pathways for aging, and TBI waiver on July 1st. The state started using a new assessment tool, or actually a suite of assessment tools to determine if someone qualified for one of those health and wellness pathways or TBI waivers. And a company called Maximus is now doing the initial level of care and all ongoing level of care assessments for the health and wellness pathways and TBI waivers. Well, effective last week, the level of care is also changing for the family support, CIH waivers, and supported group living or group home placement. They are also going to use a new set of tools. That's actually not rolling out until February, though. Even though we've made this change, they're right now they are training everybody in how to use this new set of assessment tools to make sure that people are being assessed appropriately. Now, the Bureau of Disability Services will conduct the initial level of care for the family support, CIH, and CIH waivers and for group home placement, just like they do right now. And case managers will conduct the ongoing level of care assessments for the family support and CIH waivers. Beads will continue to conduct the level of care screenings for individuals in group homes. So the individuals who are doing the assessments are going to say the same, but the tools that they are going to use are going to be different. Now, the things that they are looking at, the categories that they are assessing are still the same. they're still looking at mobility. They are still looking at use of language. They are still looking at self-care. They are still looking at learning. They are still looking at self-direction and still looking at capacity for independent living. But one of the things they're doing is they're using assessment tools that are more developmentally appropriate. And so what I mean by that is, you know, we do not expect a 2-year-old to be able to bathe it themselves. No 2-year-old, even if they don't have any disabilities, bathes themselves. So that shouldn't be something that would qualify them for the waiver. So part of it is they're looking for things that are more developmentally appropriate. We don't expect a 4-year-old to be able to prepare several simple meals because they're 4. No 4-year-old does that. Do we expect a 16-year-old to be able to do that? Likely we do, and so in part, the assessment tools that they're using are designed to be more age and developmentally appropriate. The state has also created a home and community support professionals training and registry for the family support and the CIH waivers. Now, here's the thing. The state has started using a new acronym and a new term, the Home and Community Support Professionals. It's the same thing as a DSP or Direct Support Professional. They mean the exact same thing. Part of it is, every so often language evolves, and this is one of those ways that language is evolving. You're going to see HCSP a little more in federal regulations, and so that's why they named it this, and to try to make it more consistent across all waiver types. But what they've done is they created a training and registry platform. They started using it July 1st. That's when it actually went into effect. And initially, as of July 1st, every new direct support professional who was hired on had to complete this training before they could start working with individuals. The reason I've still included it is because people who were already DSPs also had to complete this training program. And so new and current DSPs will create 2 curricula with multiple training modules inside each curricula, and they have to pass competency evaluations so that they can obtain a certification so that they can be a DSP. Okay. And so what those trainings are focused on, they're focused on being person-centered. How do we respect the individual that we are serving? How do we make sure that we are doing things the way they need us to do them? And so it's very person-centered. It is focused a little more on helping people be more independent. And really what it boils down to is treating people appropriately and treating people with dignity and respect. And so all current DSPs had to complete that certification by by January 1st of 2026. So that's why I went ahead and included it in here, is because this is something that has been transitioning. And so I wanted to bring that up. Um, Before we get into paid caregivers, I want to stop and I want to check on Q&As because we've already got a whole bunch. Um, so I will answer likely some of these. Some of these I may need to hold off on because we may be getting to it here in a few minutes. Okay, so let me kind of go through these. My son has been on the waiver for a few years, but turned 18, then 19, now 20. He was denied disability, but they haven't canceled his waiver. I am so confused. Our family insurance expires March 30th of this year, and I have to shop for all of us and or him and don't really know. Um, Basically, she's confused because, why is his waiver still active when he doesn't have Social Security yet? So part of it is when you are doing your Medicaid redeterminations, you do a financial redetermination every single year. But every few years, the state will also do a medical redetermination. You just haven't hit your medical redetermination yet. That's why he hasn't been kicked off. But I want to encourage you to actually go ahead and appeal that Social Security denial. That is essential in this process. If you have missed the appeal window, that part's scary because you need to pay attention to appeal windows. Um, you may be able to reapply. One of the things I would recommend is getting especially since he does have Medicaid in place still, getting an updated psychological evaluation so that we can make sure that we are assessing his current abilities based on him being an adult. And then when you reapply for SSI, um, when they ask, because they're gonna ask, hey, has anything changed? And if you say no, nothing's changed, they won't even take the application. So what you do is you tell them, we've gotten new testing and new assessments done. We have new information. That will then allow them to continue to reprocess that Social Security denial. Then when Medicaid comes back and it's time for his medical redetermination, they see that Social Security denial in place. They're going to try to terminate his Medicaid. Pay attention to the timeline on this. You appeal the Medicaid termination saying, we believe Social Security made this decision in error, and we have another application currently pending. We want you to keep his Medicaid in place while the Social Security process plays out. That will allow him to keep his Medicaid and to keep his waiver. The other two things I'm going to tell you to do, and please don't hate me for telling you to do this. I promise I'm helping you. We have done webinars on navigating the Social Security process, where we talk about how Social Security makes their decision and what type of documentation to create to help you get through that process. That's available on our YouTube, on the Arc of Indiana's YouTube channel. I want you to watch that because that's gonna really prepare you for what to expect in that Social Security process. And then in October of last year, we did another webinar on work incentives. And I know it may sound a little bit strange that I'm telling you to watch a webinar on work incentives, but that's the type of information Social Security is also looking for to help them determine whether an adult is disabled. So I want you to watch those two. And of course, you're welcome to call our family advocates and kind of talk through all of this as well. Um, let's see. So we've got somebody who wants to know how to sign up for the waivers and Medicaid. And and I'm also trying to figure out if they're asking how work impacts all of this. To sign up for the waiver, if you are somebody who has more physical disabilities and you need to sign up for either the health and wellness or the TBI waiver, you're going to call a company named Maximus, and you're going to tell them that you want to apply for the waiver, and you're going to schedule their level of care assessment. If you have an intellectual or a developmental disability and you need to sign up for the family support waiver, you can do that online. And oh, I don't have the website listed here. You can call us tomorrow and we can send you the website, or you can just Google it's BDDS Gateway. And that will get you to the online application. All right. Let's see. Um, uh, Will Governor Braun issue another 5% cut across the board for the 8 Indiana divisions, including social services in 2027? In all honesty, I don't know that answer. And I don't know that anybody would be able to answer that for 2027 at this point. But it's something that, especially as we get into talking a little bit more about the legislative part of this, making sure you are staying up to date with what is going on, because there are certainly rate changes for the waiver and for Medicaid that are being discussed, and you want to make sure that you know what's going on there. Um, let's see. Okay. How do we find people to do extended services? Our company is going to have the service. Yes, absolutely. So what you would do is you would ask your case manager for what's called a pick list. This is a list of all of the companies who will be providing this service in your area and on your waiver. So contact your case manager and ask for a pick list for extended services. Um, The loss of hours for behavior specialists to 6 hours is very concerning. Well, it's 12 hours, not six. And so part of it, part of their thought process in this is that there were behavior consultants who were providing services that really weren't behavior services. They were providing services that should have been provided by residential staff or by PAC staff. And so really part of what we need to do is make sure that our residential and our PAC staff are actually getting the training and the support they need to actually be doing some of this. And so that's one part of it. Like I said, behavior supports, it's 12 hours a month, not six, because I agree. Six, and I recognize the concern there, especially because we do have individuals who have really high behavior needs. And so part of that is also we need to be looking at what other types of supports are available. And I know that that is a whole lot easier said than done. Trust me, I know that part. But one of those things would be looking into what are called MRO services. That stands for Medicaid Rehabilitation Option. Those are a set of services that are available through your local community mental health center. Um, the issue is that some community mental health centers refuse to treat people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but some do, and some can do some of this remotely. The good thing is you can have those MRO services and a waiver all at the same time. And not only can those MRO services provide, a therapist and medication management, but they can also provide some additional services, things like they call it habilitation or skill building. So to work on, skills in the public. And if that sounds similar to some of our services, it is similar to some of our services. They have something called Clubhouse, which is similar to a day program. The idea is not to duplicate services, but kind of blend those services together so that an individual is actually getting more support and getting the additional supports they need to be able to do things. So, um, okay. My nephew lives with my husband and I. He has the CIH waiver. We are also his guardians and paid caregivers. With the changes you listed, can we still get paid as caregivers? That is what we are talking about next. Um, if someone is already using pre-vocational services on the waiver, can they continue to use that service? I also thought after 6 to 9 months of using the service, they will not be able to use it anymore. Not sure if that's accurate. That is an excellent question because what it is that in one of the earlier versions of all of these changes. Sorry, guys, at this point, even I can't remember when things happened, but you're right. In an earlier iteration, the state changed pre-vocational services to say that you could not do pre-vocational services for more than 18 months. In reality, we're about at that 18-month mark for most people. So you cannot do pre-vocational employment for more than 18 months. And now no new people will be able to do that. That 18-month cap is still in place. So if you started pre-vocational services 6 months ago, you can still do it for another year, but eventually that will fade out. And again, this is something that has been in the works for about 15 years. So most of the workshops that are still operating have transition plans that are either already in place or that they are working toward. And so this is absolutely a conversation to have with your workshop. hey, what are you guys planning to do as your transition? And really find out, what they are planning to figure out what is most appropriate for your loved one. So somebody is asking on the CIH waiver, could you choose self-directed care for respite and go through an agency to receive residential habilitation? You betcha, you sure can. Um, let's see. Do those 6 hours of music therapy include administrative documentation? If so, we need to separate those away from actual therapy sessions. And that's where, to be perfectly honest, I'm not 100% sure. Because I would have to look at how the definition is actually written, um, about whether or not administrative time and documentation time is included in that or not. I know one of the big issues, especially with recreation therapy, was that transportation was actually built into the rate reimbursement for it. But then we had some rec therapists who are billing for rec therapy and for transportation, even though the transportation was already built into it. So that's part of the issue. And that's something where whether that administrative and documentation time is actually built into that 6 hours, or is separate from those 6 hours, I genuinely don't know that answer. But it's something I will look into. Um, are they going to be changing the algo levels? You're not going to like my answer because my answer is not at this time. But I'm saying not at this time because we've got more changes on the horizon. And yes, that will be part of it. I am a guardian to a 19-year-old and also a single parent and only one that is providing any waiver services, specifically attendant care, due to years of looking for help and being unsuccessful. It was said that she would not qualify for hours over 40 per week due to natural supports being in the home. I have also read that it is not waiver standard to rely on Guardian to provide free service under assumption or without agreement. We used to get 84 hours a week, and she has hundreds of seizures daily. I need a break. Yes, you do. And that's one of the realities of all of this is that families certainly do a whole lot more than I think anybody really realizes. So here we've got a couple of different things that I want to break down. And I think this is something that is commonly happening where certain things have been misinterpreted, and not exclusively by families or individuals. I think certain things have been misinterpreted by providers, and by case managers. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. And as a result, things are getting changed that don't have to be changed. With attendant care. And at this point, after this question, I'm going to continue on and then come back to questions because we're getting into a lot of questions about paid caregivers. Um, because you are legal guardian, you are limited to being paid for 40 hours a week. That doesn't mean that your daughter has to be limited to 40 hours of services a week. It's just that you cannot get paid for more than that. Let's say there was somebody else available. And I know I'm saying that, and that's not necessarily this case. But let's say, for example, that you had, an aunt or a neighbor, or, you said your daughter's 19. Maybe there's a really great aide at the school that you would like to hire, and who would like to have a second job, that to provide that attendant care. In addition to that, you could do 40 hours a week, and you mentioned that she previously had 84. You could do 40 of that, and you could have other people do that additional 44. And so that is something that can happen. But I think a lot of people have heard that there are limits on relatives and guardians getting paid, and they think that that means that hours have been cut. However, I also know hours have been cut. So that's where we're going to resume, to see if maybe this will help answer more of the questions. So let's talk about who can be paid as caregivers, because this answer has literally changed 4 times in a year and a half. That is why everyone is so confused. And on top of that, who can be paid as caregivers varies by service and varies by the waiver. And one of the things they are doing in the rules that went into effect last week is that they are trying to make that much more consistent, especially across all five of the waivers. But who can get paid will also vary based on the service itself. So let's start by talking about legal guardians and relatives as paid caregivers, because we have certainly been getting calls at the ARC with people calling up to say, hey, I've heard that relatives can no longer be paid as caregivers. That is not correct. Okay. Legal guardians of adults and relatives can be paid caregivers depending on the service. But one of the changes is they will be limited to no more than 40 hours per week, per paid caregiver, per waiver participant, and per service. That's a lot of qualifiers. But let me also start by saying that the state is aligning the definition of relative. Because now this is not going to be a change for anybody on the family support or the CIH waiver. This is going to be a change for people on the health and wellness, TBI, and pathways for aging waiver. Because those three waivers had a very small definition of relative. Now they are broadening that definition of relative. And so a relative is going to be the parent of an adult, a sibling, a grandparent, a child or grandchild, an aunt or uncle, a niece or nephew, or first cousins. That is who is going to be counted as a relative. That is a natural relative. That is a step relative. That is a half relative. That is an adopted relative. And that is an in-law. So for example, if you've got a stepbrother who is going to provide services, they are now counted as a relative. Whereas on the health and wellness and TBI and pathways waivers before, because it was a stepbrother and not a biological brother, it wasn't considered a relative. Um, this also includes in-laws. So your daughter-in-law is going to be counted as a relative. Your half your half sibling is going to be counted as a relative. Your stepchild is a relative. And so that's important to know is that we are aligning the definition of relative for all five waivers. All right. And a relative and a legal guardian of an adult will be limited to no more than 40 hours of pay per week, per service, per waiver participant. Why am I stressing it like that? Well, let's pretend, for example, that we have an individual with cerebral palsy who is on the CIH waiver. And he is approved for 84 hours of residential services a week. Let's say he's also approved for 20 hours of day habilitation per week. And we'll keep it simple like that. So he's got 84 hours of residential services. Because he's an adult, mom could get paid for 40 hours of that. Sister could get paid for another 40 hours of that. And if stepdad wants to get paid for the other 4 hours, he can. Okay. Let's say sister, who's getting paid for his residential services at 40 hours a week, also wants to do his 20 hours of day habilitation per week. Guess what? That's a different service. So yeah, she could get paid for the 20 hours of day hab a week. Now, is she going to get paid overtime? Nope. Because well, I don't think so, because those are different services. Let's say we've got a family, because I know sometimes we have families who have multiple loved ones with disabilities. Let's say we've got a brother with cerebral palsy and a sister with autism. Mom could get paid 40 hours to care for the brother. Mom could get paid 40 hours to to care for the sister. They cannot be the same 40 hours. Okay? You cannot double bill like that. But that's what I'm saying is it's 40 hours per week per caregiver, per waiver participant, and per service. Okay. I know I am going to have a ton of questions on that. So please know I expect that. Now let's talk about legally responsible individuals, because this is what upended the world in early in January of 2024, when the state announced the new health and wellness pathways and TBI waivers. The most controversial thing was that less than a year after promising parents of medically fragile children that they could continue to get paid as caregivers, the state changed their mind and stopped paying legally responsible individuals, except for structured family caregiving. One of the things that also happened in what I saw was that a lot of other family members who were not legally responsible individuals were also pressured into going into structured family caregiving when that was not their preference, but they thought that was their only option, even when it was not. So, first of all, let's talk about what a legally responsible individual is. A legally responsible individual only refers to the spouse of a person with a disability or the parent of a minor child with a disability. In the waiver world, that is what legally responsible individual means. It doesn't just mean parent, it's parent of a child under 18. That it doesn't mean legal guardian. That's a different thing under waiver regulations. So a legally responsible individual only refers to the spouse of a person on a waiver or the parent of a minor child on a waiver. Now, there was a lot of uproar, and families did not stop. They made sure that they were keeping this front and center. They made sure to talk with all of their legislative officials, to government officials, to let them know what their lives were like and how this impacted their families. And guess what? The state has made some adjustments again. Effective December 31st, legally responsible individuals can be paid as caregivers under the traumatic brain injury waiver, the health and wellness waiver, and the pathways for aging waiver for attendant care if they meet the requirements under the extraordinary care definition. And for the very first time, they added this as an option under the family supports waiver for PAC services. Now, in order for a legally responsible individual, it must be in the best interest of the individual. And this is where that meets the requirements under extraordinary care definition is extremely important, because this is not going to be available to everyone. It is going to be available to far fewer than most people would think. But let's define extraordinary care. The state is defining extraordinary care as caregiving needs beyond typical age-appropriate caregiving and that's the key word here, and intensive nursing care needs. By that, they mean things like needing a continuous ventilator. We advocated that it not be a continuous ventilator need because there are a lot of people who don't need a ventilator all day long. They only need it part of the time. We were advocating that those individuals should fall under the extraordinary care definition. The state said, nope, it has to be continuous ventilator care need. Tracheostomy care, total parenteral nutrition or TPN nutrition, or other comparable needs. That is what they mean by an intensive nursing care need. So your loved one has to have an intensive nursing care need in order to qualify for extraordinary care. And they have to have caregiving needs beyond typical age-appropriate caregiving. So, if you have like I said, if you've got a 2-year-old and part of it is they are incontinent, well, that's age appropriate for a 2-year-old. So that's not going to meet, that alone would not qualify them. Um, Notice this definition also does not include behavioral needs. Please know that we are not discounting the importance of behavioral needs. We at the ARC, we understand those behavioral needs can be extremely high, but the state did not include behavioral needs in their definition of extraordinary care at this time. So when it comes to paying legally responsible individuals, they can get paid for attendant care or participant assistance and care or PAC services. They can still get paid for structured family caregiving if they prefer to do that, but legally responsible individuals will be limited to 40 hours per week for all LRIs combined. Okay, and that's one of the differences. So, for example, mom could get paid for 30 hours of attendant care a week. Dad could get paid for 10 hours of attendant care a week. It's not 40 and 40. For LRIs, it's 40 total. This is also the first time that LRIs really can get paid for PAC services on the family support waiver, with the exclusion that at the very beginning of COVID, there was about a year where they could get paid as well. But that is also, but in a continuous basis, this is the first time LRIs can get paid on the family support waiver. Notice I have not said anything about the CIH waiver. That's because no legally responsible individuals can be paid for any service on the CIH waiver. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to stop again because I know we likely have a ton of questions related to who can be paid caregivers. And so I want to get through that. Let's see. So I'm going back up a little bit. My nephew lives with my husband and I and has the CIH waiver. We are also his guardians and paid caregivers. With the changes you listed, can we still get paid as his caregivers? Yes, each one of you could get paid for up to 40 hours per service for serving him. So yes. Let's see. My daughter is 9 and was adopted out of foster care and has Medicaid through adoption subsidies. So I've never had to deal with Medicaid itself. So my question is, how do I go about applying for Medicaid and SSI after she turns 18 so she doesn't lose her insurance? Um, so after she turned, so first of all, one of the things I would do is I would talk with DCS to find out for sure when they are going to end her Medicaid, because for some they do it at 18, for some they do it at 21, some can go all the way up to 26. So have that conversation with your DCS contact now. Once she turns, whenever that is ready to run out, you can go ahead and you apply for Medicaid, and you apply for Social Security the same way anybody else would. The Social Security especially would be the same way anyone else would. With the Medicaid, what you can also potentially do, and I know that this is at least 11 years away, or excuse me, this is at least 9 years away. So the answers could change by then. But what you may also be able to do is once she turns 18, request a category change to Medicaid disability, and potentially switch over that way. There will be paperwork to fill out. What that is going to look like 9 years from now, I am not willing to say, because right now, as we've learned, everything is kind of changing at the moment. My adult child has behaviors and a criminal record. He has lost his option to get a paycheck with the workshop closure. Sad. That was the only money he can earn, as no one will hire him. He has a few friends who have significant disabilities, and they don't have work opportunities now, and the loss of a small paycheck. And that's one of the reasons why this is really controversial. But I will also say, with some of the other work that I do, You're right. When an individual has a criminal record, it is much, much harder to find employment. There are employers who will do second chance employment. There are also employment support providers who may be able to help with that. Who they are will kind of depend on where you're at. Here in the Indianapolis area, I know of some really good ones. But what I'm going to say is, first of all, don't close the door quite yet. And secondly, I'm also going to suggest, looking into things like volunteer opportunities. They've learned some work skills. Let's see if we can put them to use in some other ways. So I'm a case manager, and we are not allowed to put more than 6 hours into a month. So yes, documentation is part of the 6 hours. So earlier we had that question of whether or not um, the 6 hour limit on music and recreation therapy included their documentation. This is one of the things I love is that we are also kind of crowdsourcing answers. We have a lot of different people who are on this webinar who are able to share and lend their expertise. So we've got a case manager saying, yep, part of that 6 hours is your documentation part of that. But then there will also be a certain percentage of that would need to be working directly with the client as well. Thank you, case manager. Um, let's see. So on the CIH waiver, you could choose consumer-directed care for respite, which can be which a family member can't provide. But if you choose to do residential habilitation through an agency, then a family member could still be a paid caregiver. Well, I'm going to break your question up because sort of and not exactly. I know it's okay to hate me on that one. Um, and what I mean by that is if you are using self-directed care for respite, for example, the person asked, that means a relative can't do it. A relative can do it. A legal guardian cannot. Okay, so let's say, I know this doesn't work for this particular person because I know the person, but let's say, for example, that there was an aunt or there was a brother or there was a nephew, excuse me, or a cousin who was willing to provide the respite. They're a relative. Yes, you could hire them because they're a relative. They are not the ones who are making the legal decision on who to hire. And that's really what the limitation with self-directed care is about the person who is making the decision on who gets paid cannot be the one who gets paid. Okay. So can a relative do it? Yeah, as long as it's not the legal guardian or the healthcare representative, whoever is making that decision. Can they can any of them still get paid for residential habilitation through an agency? Yes, they legal guardian as well as any sort of relative would be able to be paid for that. So and that's why I want to make sure that we're asking or you guys are asking all of your questions is because this stuff is confusing. And the devil is in the details on all of this. I know it's really frustrating to hear me say it depends or that's kind of a gray area. And it's because there aren't clear-cut answers. The details really do matter in the answer to the situation. Um, in small towns, half the population would count as a relative. Again, um, relatives can often get paid as a caregiver. There are certain services they're not allowed to get paid for, but for many services, relatives can absolutely get paid. Um, do we go through a case management company to hire a relative, and is there a flat rate? So if you guys will excuse me, I really need to take a drink of water. So you do not go through your case management company to hire a relative. Um, what you would do is you would let's say, for example, let's use attendant care. You want to hire Aunt Susie to provide attendant care for your loved one. Okay. You go through an attendant care agency to provide that. And you say, hey, attendant care agency, this is Aunt Susie. I want you to hire Aunt Susie to provide attendant care for my son. At which point, the attendant care agency jumps up and down for joy because you brought them somebody, and they say, sure, as long as Aunt Susie can pass the criminal background check and pass the training to get her certification, we will gladly hire Aunt Susie to provide attendant care for your young son. Not a problem. If you are talking about going through self-directed care, that is where I'm going to say you need to talk with your case manager, and then you need to work with a company called Palco. And this is where, if you want to talk about self-directed care, I want you to join us next month because there are a lot of details to that, and that is its own webinar. So would it be possible? Yes. Do you go through your case manager? If you're going through an agency, nope, you go through the agency. If you're doing self-directed care, yes, and all the details on that are brand new, and so I want you to hear that from an expert. Okay. This person is pointing out caregiving for 40 hours a week really doesn't apply to the family support waiver due to the limited funds, correct? You are absolutely correct, my dear. Family support waiver just doesn't typically provide for a person to be able to do 40 hours of care. Um, okay, let's see. Um, my son is on traditional Medicaid and Medicare and on the CIH waiver. Will he be reevaluated every 6 months? So I'm going to say, no for the Medicaid, no for the Medicare. Whether he will be reassessed every 6 months for the waiver depends on the waiver. So with health and wellness and TBI and pathways, I believe they are still doing level of care every 6 months. I cannot guarantee that because that has all just changed. For family support and CIH waiver, and I know in your particular case, you said earlier that your son was on the CIH waiver. Nope, they reassess that once a year. So, um, no LRI can be paid on the CIH waiver. That is correct. They did not make that an option. But remember, the CIH waiver is an emergency-based waiver. And so there are very few children under 18 who are even on the CIH waiver. I don't know how many individuals who are married who are on the CIH waiver. I know through data from National Core Indicators, there are only about 1% of family support and CIH waiver participants who are married. So it doesn't affect that many people. But that is correct. No legally responsible individuals can be paid on the CIH waiver. And part of that too is also because the state agreed to pay LRIs for participant assistance and care, and that is not actually a service available on the CIH waiver. Let's see. Would cathing due to a neurological no, would cathing due to a neurogenic bladder count as extraordinary care? I'm going to be perfectly honest, I don't know that answer. It is something certainly that you can explore, and that's the thing, you know, because I know that there are going to be individual issues, and I know that there are going to be individual questions. So one of the things, and part of it is, the state is going to continue to put out some more documentation and some more directives on what some of these definitions are. So there's going to be some more information that comes out in the next couple of weeks trying to clarify some of this. I don't know that answer, but one of the things I would do is I would start talking to your case manager, and likely what your case manager will need to do is submit a question to the state to ask them to clarify that, and that is something case managers can absolutely do, because I think too that a lot of case managers really aren't 100% sure about all of this and are still confused because of all of the different rules and regulations and how quickly it's all changing. They're seeking a lot of guidance and clarification on all of this as well. Um, let's see. Please clarify for the health and wellness waiver for legal guardians of adult children. Paid services are per caregiver per service, but not home and community assistance. Okay, so this is somebody that I was talking to earlier this week because this question came up. like I said, whether or not a relative or a guardian or an LRI can get paid to provide a service not only depends on the waiver, not only depends on which of those three categories they fall into. Are they a guardian? Are they a relative? Or are they an LRI? One of the other issues is which particular service you're talking about, because different services will have different answers. Home and community assistance, which is a service on the health and wellness, TBI, and pathways for aging waiver, is also sometimes called homemaker services. And a relative can provide that service, but under the plan that was approved by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, a legal guardian and an LRI cannot get paid for home and community assistance or homemaker services. So if you have a parent of an adult who also happens to be legal guardian of that adult, that parent could get paid for up to, or that legal guardian could get paid for up to 40 hours of attendant care per week for that individual. If they have another legal guardian or another relative, they could get paid for up to 40 hours of attendant care for that individual. If it is another relative, they could get paid for the home and community assistance, but a legal guardian cannot. By the way, that type of information is actually in the waiver manual. That's available online. They have already updated it with all of the new regulations. I'm going to be perfectly honest. It is written. It's called the waiver provider manual. It is written for providers because it is all a bunch of jargon. You gotta be able to read bureaucracy. But all of that information is in there, including a description of each service, what is allowed under that service, what is not allowed under that service. And so you can actually get a lot of information from the provider manual as well. Um, Oh, somebody is chiming in, and I believe this is a case manager. So if somebody else could confirm this, I would really, really appreciate it. Music and recreation hours cannot roll over if they are unused either. So with waiver services, typically speaking, when you do your waiver plan, one of the things you are doing is you are not only saying what services you want, but how much you want of each service each month. Some services are use or lose by the end of the month. And I believe this case manager is saying that music therapy and rec therapy will be use or lose by the end of the month. If somebody else could confirm that, I would appreciate it. Sorry, guys, I didn't realize that I left my phone on. If Some services, though, are use or lose within the quarter. So you can roll over per quarter, but not after that. So for a 3-month span, you can roll it over, but not after that. Some are use or lose by the end of the year. Do I have a list of which services roll over and in what increments? I do not. That's where you talk to your case manager about that. But I recognize the name. I believe this is a case manager, and I believe she's letting us know that the music therapy hours and the rec therapy hours that are capped at no more than 6 hours per month cannot roll over to the next month. So my daughter has been on the family services waiver, and I was wondering, how does respite work? Are there companies that I can hire to do respite care, or does it have to be a relative or friend? So I'm going to answer that based on what is supposed to happen, and then I'm going to tell you what happens in real life. What is supposed to happen is, yes, there are agencies that you can choose, and in theory, they will have staff people who can provide respite for you. That is how it is supposed to work. Um, the way it often works in real life is respite is one of those services that where there is so much demand that provider agencies can't keep up. And so they don't necessarily have the staff to be able to provide somebody to do that. And so oftentimes for a person to actually be able to get respite, they have to bring a worker or a potential DSP to the agency to hire to then provide that respite. So, so there's a difference between how it's supposed to work and then how it works in real life. There uh, seems like there are a lot of hands in the money pot. Cutting out the middleman could save the state money. That is one of the thoughts with self-directed care. So make sure you join us next month. Um, so let's see. What exactly is attendant care? Is it a service on the Family Support or CIH waiver? It is not. So attendant care is a service specifically for the health and wellness, pathways for aging, and traumatic brain injury waivers. It is the equivalent on the Family Support waiver of like participant assistance and care or PAC services or residential services. So it's just a different service. Um, Let's see. FSSA stated during an advisory meeting a few months ago that those services, music and rec, could roll over each month of the year. Do they think that the intention was to allow it to roll over? And somebody else is saying that they heard the same thing. I am going to say, let's continue to let people. Uh, I know I've got. Oh, hold on. As I am saying that, new things are popping up. Um, As a case manager, I don't feel that we have been given clarification on that because music and rec still use a bucket, but it may be explained in the new DDRS manual. Behavior services are now divided quarterly instead of having a bucket. So if you need 8 hours 1 month, you only have 24 hours for the quarter. Okay. So I think what she's telling us is part of this is still the details on it are still coming out. And so I know that the state is planning to issue some more guidance in the next 2 weeks. And I know that they are planning to talk about not only the regulations that just went into effect, but other changes to come. They're planning to talk about that pretty extensively at the next DDRS Advisory Commission or Council, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. Um, Ah, so glad somebody's asking this. I don't think I heard you mention the new hourly documentation requirements, which is a major change the way providers are implementing it. Do you have any insight on what FSSA intended? I think the language is being misinterpreted by providers, but they have received no clarification. You are absolutely right. So one of the things that has recently come up is that provider agencies have told their direct support professionals, hey, you have to document your services every hour on the hour. You have to clock in and clock out every hour on the hour to do your documentation. Since then, I know the provider agencies I know of who are issuing that guidance have walked that back and have said, wait, hold on, state's clarifying this. That's not quite right. Put a hold on that. And I do think that that's one of the things that the state is also going to be clarifying in the next 2 weeks on all of that. Their intention was not to make somebody, clock in and clock out on an hourly basis and necessarily document on an hourly basis. But one of the things they do want to see is a lot more documentation on what actual service was being provided, not just you're providing PAC services, but what are you doing as part of that PAC service? So you're right, there has been a lot of confusion and a lot of misinterpretation, and I do believe that the state is going to be clarifying that and putting out some more directives here in the next couple weeks. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the presentation because believe it or not, we still have a lot to go. Um, I've been talking about state directives, and the state has been issuing directives, and they will continue to issue that guidance and directives. And so some examples of that are that, first of all, they have been reviewing high cost plans. So they started off by reviewing anybody who had a budget that was greater than $200,000 of services in a year. Now they are looking at anybody who has a budget of more than $150,000 per year. Part of what they are doing is looking to see, are those high levels of service really needed? And are they still needed, more importantly? Because sometimes somebody will have a budget, and especially an algo level, which is something that you get on the CIH waiver. They will have that assigned during a really, really high needs period. And oftentimes it is never revisited. And so, they may have been assessed as an Algo 5 and have a budget of $200,000 because they were in the middle of a crisis. And now that we've gotten their health stabilized, now that we've gotten their mental health stabilized, they are no longer, things are stable, things are good. They no longer have that really high Algo 5 need. And so is that, $150,000 budget still appropriate? Part of it is they are also, in their words, looking at the responsible use of waiver dollars. And we do need to make sure that we are being responsible in how we use our waivers so that we can make sure waivers are sustainable. And one of the things that the state was seeing was they were seeing really high cost services being used for things that a lower cost service could have and should have been providing. So for example, and I'm using this as an example because the state has used this as an example. Please don't vilify me for saying this. Let's say, for example, that we had a recreation therapist taking somebody to the movies as recreation therapy. Well, rec therapy is around $67 an hour, but a PAC provider, a DSP, could also take somebody to the movies. So it's not that I don't want somebody to go to the movies. It's, does it have to be a $67 an hour recreation therapist taking them to a movie? Or could a $34 an hour pack provider take them to the movies and also work on things like how do you pay for a movie? How do you get your ticket? And all of those things as well. So that is an example that the state has used. That's why I was using that as an example. But that's one of those other things that they are looking at is, are we using the correct service for what is actually being provided? One of the other guidances or directives that the state has issued was on transportation and really encouraging individuals and families to use all other transportation options before using their waiver, exhausting natural supports, using community resources that may be out there before accessing their waiver for transportation. And one of the reasons that I wanted to bring this up, though, is that these guidances, these directives, are not actual limits. And I do think that in some cases, this has been interpreted as, hey, you're not supposed to use transportation, or you can't use transportation anymore, or we have to limit transportation. That's not what was that's not how it is supposed to be interpreted. They do want you to use, make sure if there are other services available. There are certain communities that do have public transportation and who actually have free public transportation. Can we work on you using that rather than using your waiver to pay for transportation? So that was really the more of the idea behind it, but it is not supposed to be a limit. So if somebody in the team is interpreting it as that, it is not supposed to be an actual limit. Let's talk waiting lists because this is now an issue too. The family support. So when the state provides a waiver, what they do is they write up a plan and they submit it to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, for approval. That's what all of these changes have been, is new service plans that have been approved by CMS. Part of those plans includes the maximum number of people you will serve on that waiver. For the very first time, the family support waiver and the CIH waiver has actually hit their maximum capacity. They are serving all of the people they are allowed to serve under those waivers. And what that means is that there are no new waiver slots for the family support or the CIH waivers until at least July. People who are already in the process, you've already been targeted, you've been invited to join the waiver. If you are in that process, you can still get the waiver, but they are not inviting new people off of the family support waiting list. And there are very few slots for any of the waivers. The current waiting list as of December 25th, because I know this is a super common question. So first of all, for the family support waiver, the last time they were taking people off of the waiting list, it was people who signed up in August of 2022. In August of this year, the TBI started a waiting list for the very first time. So I can't give you an exact answer on what they are serving because this waiting list is brand new. All right. For people who are on the health and wellness waiting list, they are, as of December, they were targeting people who signed up October 23rd of 2024. And for people who are on the Pathways for Aging waiting list, they are inviting people who were approved March 12th of 2025. So that's the current waiting list as of December. And there are more changes coming. So first of all, there are going to be new case management contracts in 2026, and the state is planning to make some changes to case management. So there will be a new waiver amendment for that will definitely talk a lot about case management changes. I don't know what other changes may be in that yet. That has not been released yet. They plan to release that in the next few weeks because their goal is to try to implement that July 1st. They are also planning a complete overhaul of the family support, CIH, TBI, and health and wellness waivers in 2027. They are calling that waiver reset. And they've contracted with two agencies, HSRI and Aligned Consulting, to conduct focus groups and gather information from individuals on waivers and from families and from providers about what these new waivers should look like. And while those focus groups may be over, you can still give your written input. And that way you can, you can take some time, you can think it out, you can write it out, really polish it up, and you can email it to DDARS waiver reset at fssa.in.gov. I also want to pause here just a little bit because the state has said some things that, taken out of context, quite frankly, is terrifying, and is not meant to be. Okay. So one of the things that you may hear, because I've heard the state say this, is that the four waivers that the Bureau of Disability Services oversees will not exist in this same form in 2027. Okay. And so sometimes you have even heard them say, the family support waiver or the CIH waiver, that's not going to exist come 2027. They do not mean that waivers are going away. Okay. And I think, I have gotten those panicked calls from people saying, does that mean the waivers are going away? It does not. That is not their intent. This is something that has just been worded in a really confusing way. One of the things they are talking about, and nothing is set in stone right now, but what they're talking about is completely overhauling waivers. One of the ideas that they're looking at is potentially having one waiver that with all of the different services that you can oversee and all of that. But none of this is set in stone. The biggest reason I'm pointing that out is if you hear something like that, if you hear somebody say, oh, the waivers are going away in 2027, that is not what anybody meant. Okay. And I want to clarify that now. That is not what anybody meant. But you might hear something like that. What they mean is they plan to completely overhaul waivers. And in fact, so the Division of Disability Aging and rehabilitative services, they're in the middle of a name change. So pretty soon, instead of DDRS, you're going to see DDARS. They have a monthly advisory council. Most of those can be live streamed. And on Wednesday, January 21st, so 2 weeks from now, from 9:30 to 12:30, they will be live streaming the DDRS Advisory Council, where they are going to do a deep dive on waiver reset. So if you want to find out what they're thinking and what they are planning and kind of where their thought process is right now, tune into that. We've got the link there. We will be putting that on the ARC's website. But again, none of this is set in stone. All of this is something that can absolutely be influenced. But if you want to stay up to date, I want you to know that you are welcome to join that and listen in on that advisory council to hear directly from the state officials what exactly they're thinking of. So I want to stop right here and go back and see what new questions we have. Um, okay, to clarify, for family support waiver, as guardians for adult child, can we or can we not get paid for PAC services up to 40 hours a week? Yes, a legal guardian can get paid for PAC services on the family support waiver. Do we need to go through a PAC company? If you are the legal guardian and want to get paid, yes, you will have to go through a PAC company. If as the legal guardian you want to hire someone else, you would be able to use self-directed care at that point, but a legal guardian cannot get paid for self-directed care. Also unclear about how to get adult child approved for total hours per service per week. That's where you're going to talk to your case manager. The issue with the family support waiver is that the maximum budget for a family support waiver is $26,482 a year in waiver services. And so as a gross over exaggeration here, if you were to use a family support waiver for nothing but case management and PAC services, that only equals about 12 or 13 hours per week. Just because of the way the family support waiver is designed. So it's that the family support waiver doesn't have 40 hours a week for you to use, typically speaking. Could it be possible to save up all of those hours and use them all up in like the summer or something like that? That's possible. But then you've also got to decide, is that actually the thing you want to do? Or do you want to be able to make sure that your loved one is able to get additional services throughout the week or throughout the year? So we've got some clarifying questions about the about direct support professionals requiring notes and the break and hourly breakdown and all that. All of that is on hold while because the state is going to be issuing some additional information on that. Okay, so IPMG is our service provider. They have to list goals for him. My son also goes to another provider, and we have an IDP there. I'm not sure what IDP stands for. Is the state looking to see if both goals are being met by both sets of documentations by asking DSPs to provide documentation? So IPMG is actually your case management company. And when they are documenting your hours and stuff like that, what they're doing is they are creating your person-centered, individualized service plan. Case management companies can only provide case management. They can't do any other service, but they're the ones who are basically kind of being the oversight on the waiver, making sure that provider agency you work with is actually providing you the services you're supposed to get. Yes, they help you create your goals, and they are there to help make sure that the provider agencies are providing services that are helping your son be able to meet his goals. So think of and I hope I don't offend anybody by saying this, think of case management kind of as the oversight and making sure that your loved one is actually getting the services that they're supposed to be receiving through the service providers. Okay, let's keep going, guys. I know we're already at 7:30. If you are able to stay, we would love you to, because now we're about to get into the Medicaid side of things. Um, and so there are some Medicaid changes that are occurring. Some of these are actual changes. Some of these are enforcing rules that were already in place, but that the state wasn't enforcing before. Some of them are stricter interpretations of rules. Some of them are stricter scrutiny on needs. And some of these changes straddle both the Medicaid health coverage world and the waiver world. So let's start by talking about PA and using state plan. Okay, because earlier this year, there was a lot of confusion and fear and uproar because case managers were telling families, "Oh no, you have to use PA before you can get attendant care hours," or something along those lines. And parents were angry. They're like, why is Medicaid making this change? The reality is, it wasn't actually a change. It was enforcing an existing rule. So when we talk about Medicaid PA, first of all, PA simply stands for prior authorization, okay? And there are a lot of services you've got to get prior authorization for, both on Medicaid and with private health insurance, in all honesty. You may need to get prior authorization before your insurance will cover a specific medication. You're going to need prior authorization before you can get therapy services like speech or OT or PT. Um, in this case, oftentimes when we're talking about PA in the medical world, we're often talking about, or in the Medicaid world, we're often talking about home health care. Okay. And what was happening was Medicaid PA, healthcare, home health in this particular case, is a service available through the Medicaid state plan. And this is one of the times where we're also starting to have issues because officials will use the official language and the official terms for things, and then it just causes confusion. So let me translate some of this into human as much as I can. When we talk about Medicaid state plan, they're talking about Medicaid health coverage, or what most people think of as Medicaid health insurance. Okay. Um, and you are required, and it has always been this case, it's just that they weren't enforcing it. You're supposed to use those state plan services before using your waiver. And the reason for that is because states get more money from the feds for state plan services or health coverage services than they do for waiver services. So it's actually cheaper for the state when you are using your health coverage rather than using your waiver service. So in this particular case, what was happening was, and you were especially seeing this on the health and wellness pathways and TBI waivers, is that suddenly, case managers were saying, hey, you have to use PA before you can use attendant care. Technically, it was always supposed to be that way. So it's not officially a change. It's just that they're now actually enforcing that. Okay. The other part of that is what they're saying is let's use a home health aide if that is available, if you can actually qualify for that before we tap into those attendant care hours. Okay. They also use that on other services like therapies. They're going to make you go through the state plan first, but also sometimes on equipment. Even if equipment is not going to be covered under the state plan, they want to see if it'll get approved first before they'll let the waiver pay for that. They are also requiring a lot more documentation now when it comes to these services. And so one of the things that has been happening is we've gotten a ton of calls from people saying that their hours have been cut. This is where we've got stricter scrutiny going on, and a few different issues that are contributing to this. First of all, the state's trying to reduce the use of unnecessary services, and also trying to make sure that you're using the services that are appropriate for what you need. I know that sounds really condescending. It is not meant to be condescending. It's really meant to make sure that that individuals aren't using a really high cost service when there's another service, a lower cost service that could be doing the same thing. Okay. They're also wanting to make sure that the amount of services being provided are based on the individual's current needs, not what their needs were in a crisis situation. So that's also part of what's going on here. And please understand, this is me explaining things just so that you understand. That doesn't necessarily mean it is my opinion. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the ARC's opinion. It is us wanting to make sure that you know what is really going on. So when it comes to those hour cuts, because we have seen people's hours absolutely get cut, I'm not disagreeing with that. But part of it is also that we need better documentation because we've got that stricter scrutiny. Because especially when it came to something like, home health care or something like that, a home health agency would write up the orders, the doctor would sign it, and basically the doctor would say, this this person needs these home health hours because I thus decree it. Okay, that is a gross over exaggeration. It was totally meant to wake you up and to make you laugh. So hopefully it did that. But really, there wasn't a lot of detail, a lot of documentation and all that. And now Medicaid is absolutely requiring a lot of detail and a lot of documentation. You need 8 hours of home health a day? Tell me why you need 8 hours of home health a day. And what I'm seeing is that sometimes, we've had somebody who was approved for 8 hours of home health a day, and now suddenly they're being cut to 3 hours. A big part of that is often because the documentation is not there to justify why they need more. And it's really more, we've got to explain better. We've got to write the orders and the letters of medical necessity and all of that better. So when we're talking about, and this is true whether we're talking PA home health or whether we're talking therapies or whether we're talking waiver services, we need to do a better, more detailed job of our documentation. We need to say, what that service provider is actually doing with them, when they are doing it, how long does it take, and why is this particular service needed? So I have a friend who has an adult loved one with pretty significant medical needs. And he was approved for, 8 hours of home health a day. And among other things, he gets all of his food, all of his uh, all of his drinks, all of his liquids, and all of his medications through a G tube. Okay. And all of a sudden, at his last review, they said, nope, we're only approving 3 hours of support. We're only approving 3 hours of PA a day. I don't know about you. I don't take all of my medications for a day in a 3 hour period. I don't drink all of my liquids in a 3 hour period. I don't eat all of my meals in only 3 hours. And so a big part of it was that the documentation did not explain why this individual needed so much support. And so one of the things was, first of all, they appealed. And that is one of the biggest things you need to know you can do. You can absolutely appeal if you disagree, and you should appeal. And in that appeal, they explained, hey, during this 8 hour period, this is what the home health, this is, in this particular case, this young man needed a nurse. This is what the nurse does. This is how long it takes to do each one of these steps. This is why we need a nurse, is because we need this type of monitoring, and got into the details of why that particular service, in this case, nursing services, were not only needed, but why they were needed for a full 8 hours while the parents worked. That was exactly the type of information they needed. And in fact, they won the appeal and their hours were reinstated because they got more detailed. And so a lot of times when we're seeing hour cuts, I think one of the biggest reasons we're seeing hour cuts is because we don't have enough documentation to explain why the person needs those services. So we need to make sure that we are that we are providing a lot more information. I also want to talk about some troubleshooting things. So, first of all, when I started this job, I thought Medicaid was just Medicaid. I was wrong. Here in Indiana, we have 37 different types of Medicaid. And then we have some subcategories within some of those 37 types of Medicaid. One of the things is some categories of Medicaid are waiver compatible. They work with the waiver, and some do not. So first of all, one of the things that I am seeing is that sometimes when we are having Medicaid reviews, a person is getting changed from a waiver compatible type of Medicaid to a non-waiver compatible type of Medicaid. So that is something that you need to be aware of and need to be careful of. What we're also seeing is that the state has put a new rule into effect that a person has to have a waiver, has to have a correct category of Medicaid in place to start their waiver within 6 months of being targeted or being invited onto the waiver. This has now gone into effect about 6 months ago, and we are starting to see problems with that because people are having problems getting onto Medicaid or getting the correct category of Medicaid, and that is causing problems. Um, if I am being fair, the reality is um, we have waiver participants make up about 1.5% of all of the people on Medicaid. And we break a lot of their financial rules in the process. On my good days, I remember that. And as a result of that, we've got, we have people having problems because they're getting put in the wrong category, but they're also getting information from the Medicaid office that is not accurate for them. It would be accurate for the general public, but it's not accurate for a person who is on or approved for a waiver. And so that's one of the other things that is causing problems here. We are also seeing that Medicaid is doing periodic reviews. Right now, they're still only allowed to do a redetermination once a year, but they're doing reviews, which is very, very similar to a redetermination more often than that. And one of the things we're seeing is that people are not getting their notices or the mail because it's all coming through the mail, or it's very delayed. And so they're not able to get that information in because they don't know they're being asked for it, or they don't get it in time because they got the letter requesting it after the deadline. And so sometimes we're seeing people who find out that their Medicaid has been terminated because their doctor or their provider agency tells them, hey, your Medicaid is inactive or your Medicaid is not in place. We can't serve you. So one of the things we are advising is that people check the Medicaid benefits portal. But also, and especially, and this is the most important thing, you need to appeal. If you think a decision has been made in error, if you think Medicaid or the waiver has made the wrong decision, you need to appeal. If you appeal before a Medicaid termination goes into effect, you can keep your Medicaid and keep your waiver during the appeals process. But if you've already been terminated, we'd likely be able to get your Medicaid and your waiver back in place, but you're going to have a gap in services and you're going to have a gap in coverage. So you need to pay attention to the timing on that. Medicaid has created something called a benefits portal, and I'm going to, I don't know if that's just on my screen or on everybody's, but I want you guys to be able to see this QR code. We created a QR code that provides what we call a process map for how to use the Medicaid benefits portal. And it's literally screenshots where we walk you through each step along the way to show you how to use that. And one of the things we are advising people to do is actually log into that once a month. Like just as a way to remember, when you pay your rent or you pay your mortgage, log into the Medicaid account and look to see if there are any notices or correspondence, because I don't want people to lose their Medicaid or lose their waiver because they didn't get something in the mail. The other nice thing about the Medicaid's portal is that you can actually upload documents directly. So for example, when they're asking for 3 months of bank statements, you can upload those 3 months of bank statements directly instead of it potentially getting lost somewhere when you take it in or fax it in or mail it in. One of the other things we're seeing a lot of are one of the things that can happen is people getting confusing letters. Because so first of all, anytime Medicaid or a waiver or frankly any benefits program is doing something, they are supposed to provide you written notice, which means you're going to get a letter in the mail about it. The thing is, those letters are often confusing and often written in jargon or administrative wording. There are times I've had to read something two or three times to figure out exactly what it meant. We also have situations where sometimes people get what appear to be conflicting letters, and they're just so confused. This happened recently. We got a call from a lady. She'd gotten two letters from Medicaid on the same day. One letter said her Medicaid was being terminated effective January 1st of 2026. The other letter said, your Medicaid has been approved and is in place for the next year. She was so confused by that. And let's be honest, if I got those letters, I would be confused by that. It's because the devil's in the details. In her particular case, there was a change and her Medicaid categories were changed. This is a person who had just been switched from SSI to SSDI. She had been placed on Medicaid when she was approved for SSI, she was placed on Medicaid for SSI or MASI, which is one of those 37 categories of Medicaid. Well, when she switched over to SSDI, she no longer had SSI. So she didn't qualify for MASI anymore. She didn't qualify for that category of Medicaid anymore. She qualified for Medicaid disability now. She was so confused because she thought she was getting conflicting letters. And what the letters were saying, we had one letter saying, hey, you're no longer eligible for this category, and a different letter saying, hey, you're now eligible for this category. So that's one of the other issues. So you need to be able to read things for detail and try to decipher it. Talk with your team about this. Anytime you get a letter you don't understand, talk with your team. But you can also call us here at the ARC. We've got family advocates who can absolutely help you with this. If you can email us a copy of the letter, we will go through it with you. If you can't scan and email the document, if you can take a picture and text it to us, we will go through that letter to try to figure out what it's exactly saying and then talk about what your next steps need to be. One of the other things that is changing is the Healthy Indiana Plan or HIP 2.0. That is what Indiana did for Medicaid expansion. Now, let me be clear. Waiver participants are not on HIP. HIP is not a compatible category with the waiver, but we have a lot of caregivers and we have a lot of DSPs and we have a lot of people with disabilities who do not have waivers who are on HIP. Plans to cap HIP enrollment were defeated because last year they wanted to cap the number of people who could have HIP. We were able to get that stopped. But there's still going to be some limits that come in. One of the things is that they're going to be reintroducing work requirements. The most recent timeline I have seen is that they will do that by December of this year. So basically a year from now. And what they're looking for with those work requirements is for people to work an average of 20 hours a week of either work, school, or volunteering, or a combination of all of those. But there are also a lot of exceptions. So first of all, this only applies to what they call able-bodied individuals. So if you have been deemed medically frail by Medicaid for HIP, those work requirements are not going to apply to you. There are also exceptions for things like the caregivers of children. And we got it expanded to include caregivers of adults with disabilities. That's something the state did. The feds did not do that. So we're going to need to see how that winds up being implemented at the end of the year. Power account contributions. So with HIP, you put money into what they call a power account. Those are still on hold due to a federal lawsuit. The irony is Medicaid is still sending people information about power account contributions because one of the things is that with letters, especially letters from FSSA, a lot of those letters are auto-generated. There is not a human who is actually, writing that letter or even printing that letter or sending it out. It's done automatically. So sometimes we have information that's getting sent in letters to us that don't pertain to us. Or also we have things like letters that make references to making power account contributions, even though all of that is still currently on hold. One of the other things I want people to be mindful of is that when HIP was created in Indiana, there was a trigger law written into it that said if federal funding for Medicaid expansion ever dropped below 90%, and it's at 90% right now, but if federal funding for expansion drops below 90%, HIP would automatically go away. That's not happening now. That is something you need to keep monitoring if someone you know is on HIP. Okay. At this point, I want to stop real quick to ABA here in just a second, but I want to see if we have any other questions that have come through. It doesn't look like we have any new questions. So, okay. Um, oh, somebody did ask, I am so new to this, but what are PAC services? Um, my dear, it is not you. It is that we tend to speak in acronyms we speak in alphabet soup instead of real words. PAC stands for Participant Assistance and Care. It is a service that is available through the Family Supports Waiver, and it's one of the broadest things that there is. Basically, it can be an extra set of hands to help out a person with a disability. It can be helping them run errands. It can be helping them go out into the community. It's in a lot of ways, it's basically the extra person that they need to get stuff done. Okay, that's what PAC services is. I hope that was not an offensive way to describe it. What I mean by that is simply that it is a really, really broad service that can do a lot of different things. So that can be somebody, making sure that helping somebody prepare meals and eat and even, bathe and dress and all of that. But it can also be somebody taking a person to the movies or taking them shopping or go into the park or, whatever the case may be. So that's what PAC services are. Let's go ahead and keep going because now we're going to get into ABA. So applied behavior analysis or ABA services have also changed in the last year. Earlier in 2025, one of the things they did was they limited ABA services to no more than 36 months of services in a lifetime. Originally, they were planning to make that retroactive. We were able to prevent that retroactive implementation. They were also originally going to cap ABA services at no more than 30 hours a week. We were able to prevent that cap. But one of the things that the state did was that they capped the reimbursement rate for ABA services at $68 an hour. Because prior to that, they didn't have the most consistent rate reimbursement. And now, for right now, ABA is reimbursed at $68 per hour. The state also created an ABA work group established to make recommendations on what other changes should happen with ABA services. So the task force met and they made their recommendations. It is going to require a state plan amendment to go into effect. So that is something that we expect to be released in the next few weeks. The state's goal is to implement these changes in April of this year. So let's talk about what those recommendations were. First of all, it expands eligibility for ABA services beyond autism spectrum disorders. Right now, for the most part, ABA is limited to people with autism. One of the things they're doing is they are expanding it to other developmental disabilities that could potentially benefit from ABA services. They are also moving from a 36-month lifetime cap to a 4,000 hours of comprehensive ABA per lifetime. And the idea behind that is to make that more flexible and recognizing that you may start with a lot of ABA, like 40 hours a week, and slowly, as the individual is learning appropriate behaviors, tapering it down. And that way, instead of a hard 36-month cap, it's a 4,000 hour cap so that it can be as flexible and meet the individual's needs. Um, Now, they are also saying that eligibility for continued targeted ABA after that 4,000 hours may be an option if it is deemed medically necessary. The state is also going to require 9 to 18 hours of caregiver coaching per authorization period. An authorization period is typically 6 months at a time. You have to get that prior authorization, that prior approval to get ABA services, and that's normally based on a service plan that is written for 6 months at a time. They're going to require that caregivers get some training in that ABA and those ABA interventions and strategies so that the caregivers will be able to continue to implement those things at home, especially after ABA has stopped, and certainly outside of the ABA center. They are going to move to more of a group therapy model rather than individual therapy. And that can really be beneficial, especially if one of the things we are working on is social skills. You can't really work on social skills in an individual setting. And so that's where a group setting could be really beneficial. They are also going to limit coverage for ABA therapy to age 20 unless it is deemed medically necessary. And they're going to tie treatment to specific functional impairments rather than the ability to access school or the community or home or things like that. They want ABA to be working on to be tied to specific abilities. Um, there are also going to be some more administrative changes. So they're setting a standard ratio for board certified behavior analysts to registered behavior technicians so that there's more consistency across the state and that there's more supervision. They're requiring state determined accreditation for provider agencies, and they're putting a temporary moratorium on new ABA clinics. They are minimizing additional barriers for RBTs to participate in Medicaid networks. So trying to reduce the barriers for registered behavior technicians to accept Medicaid. They are also planning to cut the rate for individual ABA therapy by 10%, but then increase the group therapy rate by 10%. And they're creating an ABA program office within FSSA to oversee quality and utilization management. We've also got some provider changes within Medicaid. So, for example, as of January 1st, MDWise is no longer a Medicaid managed care entity. They were supposed to be working with individuals who were on MDWise to help them transition to a new managed care entity. That change has already been made. So if you didn't choose a new managed care entity, they likely assigned one to you. But if there's a problem, they can change which managed care entity you work with. People on waivers on all but pathways should not be in managed care, but there are some people who are. The state has also changed to only one provider for incontinence supplies for fee-for-service Medicaid. And like I said, there have been so many changes with Medicaid. Trying to keep it straight, trying to remember it all is really, really difficult. So I want to stop really quickly just to see if we have any more questions. We do not. So you're welcome to add more questions in, but let's keep going because we've got just a couple more slides. So the legislative session has also begun. The deadline to file bills was literally 2 o'clock yesterday. So we don't know all of the legislation that has been submitted yet. It's going to take about a week before they publish what all of them are. There are two bills that you may want to pay attention to. The first is House Bill 1012 that was authored and introduced by Representative Ed Clare. This is a Medicaid transparency bill. With private health insurance, every month you get what's called an explanation of benefits. They send you a letter telling you all of the different medical providers who have billed your insurance, what they were billing for, how much the insurance paid, how much was your portion, how much went to, how much of your deductible is left, how much are you on your out-of-pocket max is left. But so that way you can make sure, hey, I've never even heard of this doctor who's billed for me. Um, I didn't get this service. Who's got my number? The idea behind this is private health insurance does this all the time. It would be great if Medicaid would do this, not just for Medicaid health coverage, but also for waiver services, so that you can make sure that the amount of services that is being billed for you are the services you are actually getting. So that's one of the ideas behind this. And that way you can actually see how much of your waiver budget you are spending on services to see, do you think that it's worth that amount of money, or do you want to try a different service or use a different service? So that's the idea behind that bill. Then we've got House Bill 1102, which was introduced by Representative Rod Green. And this is to help improve transitions from ABA therapy to school. So there are a lot of different provisions in that bill. That's another one to watch. But one of the things I want to encourage you to do is sign up for the Arc of Indiana's legislative action alerts. We send out a legislative memo by email typically once a week, normally on a Friday afternoon, just to let you know what is going on with all of the bills that we are tracking, bills that would impact people with disabilities and their families, just so you know what's going on and so you can monitor that and see how things are currently going. It is a free service. We do not clog up your inbox. Normally, we only do this during the legislative session. Last year, we continued past just because of everything that was going on at the federal level too. But I highly encourage you to go ahead and sign up for those the legislative memo and the legislative action alerts so that you can keep up to date on what exactly is happening. The other thing I want you to know, and really stress this, is appeal. You have the right to appeal. If someone is making a decision you do not agree with, you do not think is right, you have the right to appeal, and you need to know your rights. First of all, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's waiver, whether it's Social Security, you know, you have the right to appeal, but you need to pay attention to timelines because there is a limited amount of time to get your appeal in. And those timelines vary based on the program and the issue. So you've got to pay attention to those timelines. If your appeal is received in time and before the implementation date, you get to keep your benefits while you're appealing. If they've already terminated your Medicaid or your Social Security or your attendant care or whatever the case may be, it's going to stay paused until your appeal is completely done. So if you get that appeal in before all of that, your services stay in place. Here's the other thing though. All you need to do is get your appeal request in. You can gather your documentation and make your case after submitting the appeal request. So get the appeal request in. Then you can work on the documentation to prove why you actually need the service or why you still qualify. But an appeal preserves your rights. And here's the thing, you are welcome to call us at the Arc of Indiana. We will absolutely talk to you about your appeal, talk to you about what you need to do. We can walk you through it. Now, with Social Security, that's really where you need an attorney. But when you're talking about Medicaid or you're talking about waiver, we can absolutely talk with you about that. If you feel more comfortable with an attorney, we can tell you what attorneys may be an option for you. But those are things that we can absolutely help with as well. Um, Apparently had that slide twice. But we also want you to stay up to date because like I've said, The state is going to issue some new directives in the next couple of weeks. They're going to submit a new waiver amendment probably within the next month. There are more and more things coming out, and there are more and more changes being planned, especially when it comes to Medicaid health coverage. So you want to stay up to date. You can do that through the ARC's e-newsletter, which we send out just once a week. We send it out on Sundays, as well as our legislative action alerts. You can also follow us on social media because we will always be putting information out on social media as well when it comes out so that you can stay up to date and get accurate, reliable information. You can also consider signing up for the state's distribution list, and they've got a ton of different ones, so you can specify which ones you want. If you want to get notices from the Department of Natural Resources, they will send you those things. Maybe you are somebody who loves camping and loves the state parks. That's a great way to stay in touch with them. But Medicaid has those. The Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services has those. Vocational Rehabilitation Services has those. The Department of Health has those. So there are a lot of different ones that you can choose from to sign up for. And so with that, I want to check. We do have a couple more questions that have come in. Let's see. How hard do you think it will be to prove medical necessity for ABA for individuals who are over 20 years of age? What are the qualifying factors to prove that medical necessity to receive ABA coverage? I'm going to be perfectly honest, I don't know that answer. And so one of the things I would do is I would work with your ABA center on that because they've got an interest in helping you. But I think one of the things that is going to be necessary is not only showing why ABA is necessary, but also showing what improvements have been made thanks to ABA. So, because one of the things is that if somebody is not improving, if we're not seeing any benefit, if we're not seeing them learn new skills, it's going to get denied because it's not being effective. So we've got to be able to show the data too that this is something that is actually beneficial. And let's be honest, any good ABA center is taking down tons and tons of data. So it's going to be showing why they absolutely need this, why this is, especially if they're over 20, why this is the only service that's going to work. So for example, if you have somebody who is nonverbal, they cannot engage in talk therapy. So this is the only behavioral health program that they can engage in. That's the type of thing that you need to document, but then also document this is the amount of growth we have seen in the last year or the last 2 years. Continuing this intervention will be beneficial, and we expect to see these types of gains in addition to that. So something along those lines is, I think, what would be most effective, but work with your ABA center on that as well. Somebody's asking about self-directed care, and they're asking if I can explain it. I'm going to do you one better because in February, our Ask the ARC is going to be all about self-directed care, where we can really get into the details. I'm working on securing a guest speaker who can really dive into the details on that. So that is our goal, is to have somebody new to talk about self-directed care and really get into what it is, how it could be beneficial, how it works in real life in our February Ask the ARC. So join us next month. Let's see. So somebody's asking, is this why I received notice that my son's incontinence supplies will now be going through JV Medical? We've been using Benson's for years. Yes, that's exactly why. The state has gone to one provider for incontinence supplies for what's called fee-for-service Medicaid, which is what most of the Medicaid categories who for waiver beneficiaries are. Let's see. When and where will a recording of this webinar be posted? In the next few days, this will be on our YouTube channel. So the Arc of Indiana has a YouTube channel. All of our Ask the Arcs are posted on there within a few days. I've got to give our team a few days to edit it and to cut out the waiting and all of that. But they do try to get that up as quickly as they can. So it'll be on the Arc of Indiana's YouTube channel so that you can go back and rewatch parts of this anytime you want to. You will see any of our old things. You will also see, I do Ask the Arc, but Sarah Geis, who is with the Arc Master Trust, does a webinar series called Talks with the Trust. So you can see all of her information. She's got a lot of great information, especially on the financial side of the world when it comes to disabilities. So all of that is available on the Arc of Indiana's YouTube channel. Is the age limit of 20 years old in order to receive ABA in effect now or just proposed? I believe it's actually already gone into effect because they were wanting to do that already anyway. And part of that has to do with there's a Medicaid regulation called Early Periodic Screening, Diagnosis, and Treatment, or EPSDT. The basic purpose of that regulation is that anything that is medically necessary for a child to receive, Medicaid has to cover it. And so it has higher reimbursement rates and things along those lines. And so EPSDT applies for children up to age 21. That's why are they saying the age limit is 20 for ABA therapy, is so that it can be done under the umbrella of EPSDT. Um, Somebody's asking, what is the new upcoming waiver amendments? I don't know yet. Until they actually publish them, I don't know. But like we said, one of the things is that the state is going to on January 21st, the state is going to hold their DARS advisory committee or DARS advisory council. That is something that will be live streamed. It will also be recorded and posted later, but they tend to take a little while before they post things. If you are able to join that, I would highly recommend that because they're going to do a deep dive into waiver amendments that they're planning to propose. So between that and keeping up with the Arc of Indiana on our social media and on through our e-newsletter, we are going to keep people as informed as we can and as quickly and accurately as we can. Once the state actually publishes those waiver amendments, we will eventually have a webinar going through all of those waiver amendments so that you can submit public comment. Typically speaking, the waiver amendments, if we're doing 5 different waiver amendments, that's about 1,900 pages. So I have to have time to read them. But we will absolutely be doing a webinar on any proposed waiver changes once they are announced. So stay tuned on that. And since you are already on this webinar, you are registered for all of our Ask the Arc webinars. You're going to be already registered for that. So you would also get an email in your inbox letting you know that we may be having a special session of Ask the Arc specifically on the waiver amendments or something along those lines. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this was very long. We've gone longer than 2 hours, but I wanted to make sure your questions were answered. But if you're anything like me, you're going to think of something 3 weeks from now. Give us a call at the Arc of Indiana. Absolutely, talk things through with us. We will be able to tailor the information specifically to you, and we're here to help. We are also either parents or self-advocates ourselves, so we live this life too. We get it, and we are here to help. Thank you all for joining us, and see you next month for Ask the Arc. Bye bye, everybody.